If you're in Madrid, and just like me, you've realized that there is not enough time for you to walk around it properly, then welcome to the club, and let's check what we can see in Madrid in just a few hours. I did not have a lot of time to walk around. This is why this walk turned out to be quite short. I actually think you only need about 4 hours to complete it. But please bear in mind that I like to walk and I walk pretty fast. So take that into account if you want to repeat it. Let's go. I am starting from the southeast, and this is a very symbolic place to start because this is a train station, a gate to the city. And indeed, many years ago, this was one of the places where the city gates were standing, while Madrid was still surrounded by the city walls. However, in 1851, the gates were demolished and a station was built. Now this is the biggest station not only in Madrid, but in the whole Spain. And you can actually see how busy it is by some crazy amount of cars and taxis packed around. But they're parked in a really nice way, so they do not really obstruct anything. Oh, and there is also a very rare nowadays public phone booth on one of the nearby streets, and it's actually working. But hey, of course I'm not here for the booths and taxis. This is what I'm here for. This is the main building of the train station, and it was originally designed by Gustav Eiffel. And yes, you might have seen his works elsewhere. It was originally constructed in 1892 and served as a main building for trains for exactly 100 years, when a new building was constructed, and this one was converted into a garden. And you can visit it absolutely free of charge. There are 2 historic trains which are now live in Atocha station. First one is called the Strawberry Train, and it is indeed a historic train with a steam engine which follows the route of the very first train from this station. Another train is called the Cervantes train, and it leaves Atocha to the home city of Cervantes, Alcalá de Henares, where he was born in 1547. And it was also there 61 years before that, in 1846, when the Catholic kings of Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand, met there one of the adventurers of the time, Christopher Columbus. He asked them for the money for one of his travels and was refused. Unfortunately, I do not have time for such travels now, so I'm leaving the train station and heading to the Retiro Park, passing by this building, which is merely Ministry of Agriculture, which I'll refer to later. On my way to the park, I have suddenly found the second-hand bookstore shops. I did not know this at the moment, but it turned out that this is the most famous second-hand bookstore in Madrid, and it dates back to the beginning of the 20th century. Since 1919, these stalls were closed and opened, refurbished, moved and opened again. So right now, these stalls have the appearance of about 1960s, 1970s. You can see most of them were closed on the day when I was there, and it is actually good because otherwise I would have stayed there forever. I'm not sure how you feel about these places, but for me there's something truly special in them. And I think you'll be lucky if you go there and the shops are open and you can feel the spirit of this place. And if you need any directions to find this place, there's a little square with a monument to Claudio Moyana on the bottom part of the street. And on the other side, next to the entrance to Retiro Park, there's also a small square with a monument to Spanish writer Pío Baroja, who initiated this fair. This is where I finally got to one of my intermediate destinations, the Buen Retiro Park. It means something like Park of a Nice Retreat. It dates back to the 17th century when the King of Spain, Philip IV, converted this park around his country residence, which was actually outside of the Madrid city walls at the time. So he converted this park into a place for balls and celebrations of his court. Of course, later rulers of Spain modified and adapted this park for their needs, until the park and the palace itself were completely destroyed in the beginning of the 19th century by the French army, which invaded Madrid during the Peninsular War. This was when this porcelain factory, which was located in this park, was also destroyed, and that's all what's left of it. Of course, the park was later restored, and now it has a lot of other attractions. For example, this monument and this fountain, which is actually a monument to the devil. It's called the Fallen Angel, and the place where it stands has a height of 666 meters above the sea level. If I believed all this rubbish, I would have said that there's something special in it. But no, this is just a fantastic piece of art. Despite this was quite late autumn, these fountains with drinking water were still operating, and honestly speaking, they helped me a lot later on. Oh, and just look at these signs. For me, they look like something straight off the books. One of the attractions which you cannot miss in the park is the so-called Crystal Palace. It was originally built in 1882 as one of the pavilions for the exhibition of Philippines, which at the time were one of the Spanish colonies. It is not very clear if Ricardo Velázquez Bosco took part in constructing this Crystal Palace, but it is for sure that Joseph Paxton, who designed and built the original Crystal Palace in London, took part in constructing this one. The original Crystal Palace in London was also originally built as a pavilion for the exhibition, then moved to another place, burnt and was demolished. Quite fortunately, the Crystal Palace in Madrid still stands on its own place, although it has initially been designed so that it can be taken apart and then rebuilt somewhere else. The palace itself is of course not made from crystal. It is in fact glass in lace metal frames on top of a brick foundation. And at the very top of this foundation there is a fantastically decorated ceramic frieze. Since all metal parts were actually casted in Bilbao, there is also an indication to that. Of course, there is a lot more to be told about this place, but my idea is to let you know what you can see in Madrid in such a short time. There is a lot of information easily available, and I do not see any reasons to read wiki articles here. A little bit further, there is a so-called Velázquez Palace. It is not named after the famous painter, but it is actually named after Ricardo Velázquez Bosco, an architect who has actually designed it. He also designed that Ministry of Agriculture building, which I showed you before. The Velázquez Palace was originally built in the end of the 19th century as a pavilion for the exhibition of ceramics. This is why there are a lot of amazing ornaments around the palace. But please beware of the birds near the entrance. Both the Velázquez Palace and the Crystal Palace today operate as an exhibition halls, and you can get in there absolutely free of charge. If you go further into the park, you will inevitably find a huge rectangular lake with very cute ducks and some sort of a pantheon on one side. And this is indeed a monument to one of the most beloved Spanish kings, Alfonso XII. The figures around him symbolize art, science, navy, and so on. And there's a fantastic story behind this monument, why the architect did not leave until the end of the construction and so on. But you can read it elsewhere, and just as a little piece of advice, if you do not want to rent a boat there, you can use the stairs to get down to the water and get some much needed rest. It was getting late and I was heading to the exit from the park when I was unpleasantly surprised, to be honest, by the amount of plastic trees around. There are so many natural trees around there, and I do not understand why use this plastic. My next stop is the famous Alcalá Gate. In Spanish, it's called Puerta de Alcalá, and this is actually one of the 5 ancient city gates which were used until the end of the 19th century, because surprisingly enough, until 1869, Madrid was still surrounded by city walls. The road from this gate led to a nearby city of Alcalá de Henares, which I have already mentioned when we were talking about Miguel de Cervantes, who was born there, and hence the name of the gate. This is, of course, not the original gate which was standing there in the medieval times, because in the middle of 18th century, King Carl III wanted to rebuild the gate and chose the project of Francesco Sabatini, who actually submitted 2 projects, and both of them were implemented. But here I need a little bit of a lyrical digression to explain you the difference. Now a little piece of knowledge. What is the difference between the column and an alley? Without going into much details, the column is usually a load-carrying unit. It's round and it's freestanding, while an alley is not a load-carrying unit. It's usually rectangular and is simply attached to the wall. And now I can explain the difference between the 2 projects. One of them used columns and another used alettes. And if you now look at the 2 sides of the gate, you will see that they're different. On one side there are 12 columns, and on the other side there are alettes, and only 2 central pieces are columns. And this is not the only strange thing about this gate. The gate is decorated by the sculptures, which were not made by Sabatini. So they are different because the sculptures are more Baroque style, and this contradicts the neoclassical structure of the gate itself. But does it really make it bad? My next stop is the Square of Cibeles, and until 1900 it was actually called the Square of Spain, and only then renamed after the fountain. It was erected in the center of the square by the same king, Carl III, who reconstructed the Alcalá Gate, which we have just seen. The architect of this fountain is the same person who created the sculptures on the Alcalá Gate, so you may find some similarities, but it is really difficult to see the fountain. It stands right in the middle of the square and there are no pedestrian crossings to it. So I guess the story about the debauch of Phrygian gods has to wait until the next time. There are some historical buildings surrounding the Cibeles Square. For example, the Buena Vista Palace, where if lucky you can see soldiers in historical uniform. Here you can also see the Bank of Spain and the Linares Palace, which is reportedly still inhabited by ghosts. There is also the so-called Casa de America, which is responsible for the cultural interaction with Spanish-speaking countries, mostly Latin America, of course. There is also the so-called Cibeles Palace, which used to be the main Spanish post office, but now it is used by the city council and a few exhibition halls. I decided not to go to the city center, which I will do later, but rather turn left to the Prada Boulevard to see a few fountains. Some of them you can see pretty close, such as this Apollo fountain, but others have the same problem as the Cibeles. For example, this Neptunus fountain. You can't really see it because you can't really reach it. It seems to be really nice. There are some dolphins and horses carrying the god, but how can you see it in the middle of the traffic? The Neptunus and the Cibeles fountains are the usual places for the celebrations of Atletico and Real supporters, and I do not really understand how they cope being so close to each other. Still, this was an amazing walk. I have even got to the Naval Museum, which unfortunately I couldn't get into, but I'm sure that a country with such an amazing naval history should have something special there. It was also too late for the Prado Museum, By the way, did you know that you can get in there for free? You just need to take care of that during the day. So, well, I had to go to some other place, which turned out to be even more interesting. This is a church of San Jeronimo del Real, a 16th century late Gothic church. And it's not simply late Gothic, it's Castilian late Gothic, which means that the decorations there are special for the region. And the part of these decorations, there is also something else. Some parts which are usually closed for private prayers are open here. Look, isn't it beautiful? This is the longest walk, where the most interesting part is in the end. So, meanwhile, you can have a look around. And let's be fair, Madrid is really nice, although I can't understand it sometimes. For example, I cannot understand this 12 hours sign on the pharmacy. I know what is 24 hours sign, but what is 12? I'm also surprised that there are no manual switches for the pedestrian crossing. But when it finally switches on, it is actually so cute. You really need someone to walk hand in hand. I was also a little bit surprised by how close the cars stop to the pedestrian crossings. Well, but these are really minor things. Madrid is really nice. One of the attractions on the way is the Lope de Vega Museum. And if you didn't go there, your next stop is Puerta del Sol. The square itself is more or less as you expected. There is a famous bear with a strawberry tree, and the strawberry tree can actually be that good. It's not the strawberry we usually think about. Then there is a famous post building, which is the only one standing here from the 18th century. Just look how cool it looks at night. And that clock is actually the magic one when you need to eat 12 grapes at midnight for your dreams to come true. In front of the post, there is a 0-kilometer mark for the whole Spain. It's roughly where these guys are filming. And there is just one thing which I wanted to show you specifically. This is the monument to King Carl III, who ordered to build most of the things we have just seen. And once you cross the square, your nose will inevitably bring you to one of the famous bakeries on the spot. It is there from the end of the 19th century. Some maps say that it is actually located on another square, although the sign on the building still says Puerta del Sol. Here comes the shortest and probably the easiest walk between the locations, and through one of the 8 specially designed gates I finally enter Plaza Mayor. This is probably the most prim and formal official square of Madrid, as opposed to democratic and easygoing Puerta del Sol. Right now it is being prepared for the Christmas market, and it doesn't look as nice as it can be. It is a little bit better at night though. However, this was the first place in Madrid where I saw a Spaniard wearing the same neckpiece which I'm so much used to seeing them in. This is the monument to King Philip III, and the monument actually dates back to the 17th century, although it was initially installed elsewhere and only later moved to Plaza Mayor. This is probably why Lope de Vega called Plaza Mayor the navel of Spain. As long as we're talking about top-class Spaniards, this is probably the right shop for them. Sombreros for real caballeros. If you are getting hungry by this time, this is probably the right place to make a stop, because next to Plaza Mayor there is the so-called San Miguel market, which is a known gastronomical spot in Madrid. I was not particularly interested in food myself, but it was nice to see a building which is over 100 years old and which reminds me of the design of Gustave Eiffel. My route now passes through Grand Via, which at some stage was named after Russia, and at some stage it was even called the Street of Soviet Union. It is mostly a shopping street, and I'm not really interested in it. So I was simply passing by and looking at Madrid, which is less than 100 years old. The only reason for me to pass by Gran Via was to reach Plaza de España, which Gran Via ends with. Unfortunately, I only came there quite late and it was really dark, and therefore I could only see the Cervantes monument in the dark, and this is why I will now have to use someone else's photos. Here is finally the main reason why I came so far. This is a real ancient Egyptian temple dating back to the 6th century BC and dedicated to the goddess of Isis. Originally built by the Egyptians and later rebuilt by Romans, it ended up in Madrid in the middle of the 20th century as an appreciation for the help with the relocation of the Abu Simbel temple. This is probably one of the most famous Egyptian landmarks where the gods are carved in a huge wall. The original position of Abu Simbel temple was supposed to be submerged after the creation of Aswan Dam. Therefore, to save Abu Simbel, the temple was relocated a little bit higher and stayed in Egypt, while some smaller temples were disassembled and presented to the countries which helped with the relocation of Abu Simbel. This is how the Bod temple ended up in Madrid. And honestly, this is an absolutely incredible feeling when such an ancient temple is right at the reach of your hand. What is even more surprising is that you can visit it absolutely free. You just have to get there when the temple is open and wait a little bit outside. And once you're inside, it's an absolutely mind-blowing experience. Just thinking of the age of these stones, of what they have seen, what they've been through. And I am actually a little bit sorry for the Temple of the Bod. It definitely deserves a lot more attention than it gets. An important landmark which you cannot miss in Madrid is of course the Royal Palace. And this is another time when I have to mention King Carl III, who was actually the first one to move into this palace in 1764 after the palace was rebuilt following the huge fire which destroyed it. It is indeed a very impressive building, and you can feel that the Spain dominated the world at the time. Just a few steps further, there is the so-called Almudena Cathedral. It is not really impressive from the outside and from the inside as well, to be honest, but it's a true cathedral which was built in the end of the 19th century when the Pope has finally allowed Madrid to have its own bishop. What is more interesting to my taste is that right opposite from the cathedral there's a little street sculpture. I don't really know what it means, but I quite like it, and I have seen quite a lot of those all across Madrid. Of course, there is a lot more in Madrid to see, and Spain itself is a fabulous country which gave us remarkable pieces of art and literature, and even the Age of Discovery was hugely dominated by Spain. Even though these days are gone, you can still feel the spirit of this grandeur. And Madrid is definitely worth another detailed visit. Let's go!